Dr. Wimberly, in your lecture today with us at the Youth Ministry Initiative, you gave a really lovely and evocative description of what the historic role of the Black church had been for its members and adherents, but then traced the way in which that role had faltered. How would you characterize the historic role of the church, and what happened to it?
Well, the historic role of the Black church from the era of enslavement for a long period of time was to be the extended family for the Black community. And the extended family served as the carer, the supporter, the guide, the spiritual anchor for people whose backs were up against the wall. But suddenly, when we came to the Great Migration after the period of enslavement, beginning around World War I and thereafter, when folks moved from the South to northern cities, there was a question about the openness of churches to them, the welcome of the churches to them, and where, in fact, they could go to get the same kind of experience of the extended family for them. And in fact, there was the statement that was made by a poet whose last name is Wright, who said, churches, open your doors and welcome these folks so that those in the street will not do the welcoming for them, and our young people go in directions that they need not, should not go. And so the question was raised, what happened? What can be done? And of course, at that time, storefront churches opened, new churches were developed that fulfilled that role. But then came the civil rights movement, and we saw then a spectacular involvement of young people in the churches who carried out the civil rights movement. It was those young people who sat in at the counters and who marched and who took unbelievable harassment and dehumanizing treatment and brutal attacks to get through that movement, which was led, we know, by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But then after that movement, wow, we can only really see and cry, because even with civil rights laws that were passed, there was still so much to be done. A lot of Black people were able to advance, to gain employment, to further themselves in school, but this was not by any means a whole population. Many, many more, a great proportion of Black families and young people were subjected to abject poverty, joblessness, economic destitution, and all that you could name, and then to be placed almost in uninhabitable conditions in inner cities. And out of that, of course, we know came the hip-hop generation and hip-hop culture, which functioned almost as an alternative to that weekly time in the church and church worship. Now, we can't say that all of those young people were out of the church. Some of them were, but nonetheless, we have an alternative culture that formed to try to respond to the difficulties that Black people and certainly young people were facing at the heels of the civil rights movement. In response to the lack of the churches or difficulty in churches' response to young people, we see young people straying away from the church and not becoming involved. And from that time onward, from post-civil rights movement, when they thought things were happening and found that they were not, and homelessness prevailed, a feeling of hopelessness prevailed, and a sense of meaninglessness prevailed, we find that the numbers of young people not in church and not connecting with church began to rise. I might add to that, though, that really can be said that our young people are connected. Make no mistake about it. They're connected with peers. They're connected on social media. And so it brings me to the point that I can say, perhaps, or really, the matter is that churches are disconnected with our youth.